Right, in this lesson we're going to look at a misty, foggy scene, and here we've got a photograph of a very typical sort of early morning mist. Now what I've done already is to prepare the background scene. I've used so far three colours. We've used ultramarine blue, phthalo blue and the white. Okay, let's have a look at the first thing we're going to do. We're going to paint in an outline of the sun, and then a little bit later I'll bring in just a rough outline of the tree, and we'll add 2 or 3 horses and then a few of these little bushes and grasses, and probably a fence post, just to give that essential depth to the picture. Right, now you can see I've mixed a very pale blue from the white and just a touch of the ultramarine blue. We're going to use this actually for the watery sun, and against this background it'll appear quite light and quite white. You can see there we're just starting to paint it. I think I might just add a little touch more white to it. It's just needs to be high. That's better. That's better. Okay, I'm going to let that dry off a little bit because I need to paint over that and just take some of that hard edge out, because the whole point about a misty morning is that you have very few hard edges, especially in the background. What I'm going to introduce now is this tree. Right, I've added a little bit of raw umber to the proceedings. You can see it's a sort of a mid-brown colour. It's actually a yellowy brown when you pull it out a bit thinner. And I'm going to add some white to it because we want to keep this tree reasonably light, and I'll also add a little bit of ultramarine blue. Now then, I'm going to start about here, and you'll see this in much more detail in the trees DVD, but there's no harm in giving you a little taster before we get going. Right, well, you can see that I've just completed this tree by no more than just simply scrubbing in sideways, almost a semi-dry brush, just creating a lot of little sort of something and nothing clusters of trees and branches and leaves and so on and so forth. Right, I'm just going to add in a very slight hint of some background trees. You can see how pale they are. In fact, I'm going to make them even paler than that by adding a little bit more white, because it really is a way of creating that depth and distance. It's almost hardly there. That's sort of in front of the sun, and you can see the way they're coming down to nothing. Okay, you can see that I've added a little bit of white and I've faded that down to almost nothing here. And now what I'm going to do is to just do a couple of horses. Very, very simple shapes, no detail whatsoever. I'll just take the brush down like that. We'll just do a little hint of this back leg there. It's quite a big brush this, so you can see why we can't be doing too much detail. I'm not attempting to paint the bottom of the legs because they're going to be lost in the misty grass. Right, now you can see that we've just produced, very simply, as I showed you with the first horse, 3 horses clustered together. Right, we've progressed quite well now. I've scrubbed in, as you can see, some very scrubby, semi-dry brush effects where I've taken the filbert brush and just literally scrubbed across the canvas, and I've let the paint just sort of hit and miss using the canvas texture to create an impression of grasses and fields and whatever you want it to be. You can see I've made it slightly dark, a little bit more ultramarine into this grey blue as we're coming forward. Okay, you can see that the overall mistiness pervades itself across the sun, across the horses and across the trees, and there's only this sort of extreme foreground that's in any sort of sharp focus, and that's what we're going to replicate now, because this is what the exercise is all about. It's creating this misty murky effect over the whole scene without making it muddy. We've let everything dry, so what I've done is to mix up let's use this big 1-inch brush again. I've used quite a thin watery colour of phthalo blue and white, and a fair amount of gel retarder. Reduces the consistency of the paint, but I'm also going to dip the brush just lightly, just the bottom of the hairs, in the water, just to thin it down a bit more. Now you can see that's put quite a light coat over the whole picture. You can see I'm just bringing it down quite lightly, and you can see the difference already before it's started to dry in between the strength of this tree and the way in which it started to lose the strength behind that glaze. Okay, we've dragged this down and lightened it off towards the bottom of the picture. By lightening it off, I've really just added water, so it's almost become a watercolour glaze. But you can see how that's created a very believable glaze and a very believable mistiness over the whole picture. And what it also does is helps to tie the whole picture together. It brings the atmosphere of the sky through from here in the background and the distant sun into the foreground. What I'm going to do is just let this dry, and then we'll come back and put some strong foreground grasses in, which will really help to push the whole thing back even further and create tremendous depth in what is otherwise a very simple picture. What I'm going to use is the fan brush, and I'm really just going to use the colours that we've got here already on the palette. So what I'm going to do here is some strong sort of grasses. You can see that this is, as I said, the fan brush, and it gives you a particular effect. I'm going to actually play around with this brush and a little bit of neat ultramarine blue. We'll just carry on filling in here and there. So I've filled in the grass areas. I've just used the number 5 filbert brush. You can see I'm just actually dragging some of that dry brush paint up to give a hint of some grasses. I'm going to use the rigger brush in a minute to give 1 or 2 more specific grasses. Maybe just a little bit of yellow ochre in the foreground just to warm things up. Okay, I've just put a few little highlighted, again muted highlights of grasses. Right, I've stopped there because otherwise I'm going to fiddle this to death, and the object was really to create a misty morning, and I think we've achieved that. You can see by putting the glaze all over the picture after we put the main elements down, and then emphasizing the mistiness by putting a sharply focused foreground in here, we've put everything back into its place and created a lovely subdued early morning misty atmosphere. Right, now in a number of lessons that I'll be doing, and this is one of them, I've looked at the picture a week or two after I've actually completed it, and I've made some minor adjustments that I think have improved it. And I want you to get used to the idea of casting a critical eye over your paintings a few days or a few weeks afterwards. And in that way, you'll pick up on little errors and hopefully be able to put them right. So if we move on to this picture to start with, if you remember, we created this misty scene, but what I've done is put another layer of glaze and white and ultramarine, very pale layer, over it to create a greater mistiness. But more importantly, I've added a little bit of creamy yellow ochre and white to the sun and put in a few streaks of the same colour across the ground, on the tree here, on the horses, and in the foreground on some of these plants. And what that does is to lift the whole picture, so you still have the misty atmosphere, but it's improved it now. I think it has, because it's added a subtle warmth to the whole scene.